I do want to get on to the University of Florida, but before we do, we have to touch on your second analyst badge story. It's an event that occurred while you were coming back from Tallahassee to Jacksonville.
So typically those days would start at 5 a.m. with me leaving from Jacksonville back to Tallahassee. And so I would work a complete day. And so I was getting on I-10 off of, I believe it was Mahan in Tallahassee at about 5:15, 5:30. And I just got on the interstate and I witnessed a single commercial motor vehicle rollover. And sort of instinctually, it was going westbound and I was traveling eastbound. I slide into the median and I'm in full business heels and everything. And I slide into the median. I run across I-10. I start to perform CPR on the ejected passenger. He was bleeding. He was in shock. He was definitely out of it. He was alive. He was alive. So it was more like controlling the bleeding. And I called 911 to describe the scene. And luckily I knew the dispatch codes and I knew what information they were going to need, because at that point I had already been on the auxiliary unit for a couple years at that point. So I was very familiar with radio, traffic, dispatch codes, what was important. And so I sort of spit it out, describing the scene. And I'm there for, it felt like an eternity. To be honest, doing CPR, well, really triage. He was still breathing, so it wasn't quite breathing at that point. And so the first trooper comes to the scene. It felt like an eternity, and he was a commercial motor vehicle trooper. And so he was not concerned necessarily with me and the victim that was lying on the ground. He was concerned with the hazardous material that was potentially oozing out of the truck. I could just hear like sort of a gas sound. And so he was definitely concerned with that. We're talking rush hour traffic through Tallahassee at this point. And so eventually I call my immediate supervisor, because I knew that at the time he had his CAD up, and I said, hey, can you check to see if anybody's coming to the scene? It feels like I'm here for a long time. And he goes, are you at the scene at I-10? And I said, yes, I'm the only one here. I have the CVE trooper. And long story short, the cavalry ended up coming. A couple of troopers came, took over for me. I went and talked to the driver who was pinned. He was not getting out. The only thing I can think of was just to continue to talk to him for a few minutes. Another trooper came, and then I ended up doing the traffic control on I-10 and shutting down a lane. So, and then eventually more troopers came, the fire and rescue came, and then I was sort of pushed off the scene, and I got back into my vehicle and started driving back to Jacksonville. I had to pull over, to be honest, about 10 minutes down the road, because the adrenaline dump of that scene was just, there are no words. And it just gave me so much of an appreciation for what law enforcement does every single day, that they put themselves in harm's way, whether that be troopers, police officers, or sheriff deputies. And that was a traffic scene, let alone other types of law enforcement. And for the EMS folks, gave me so much more of an appreciation for what they do every single day. And so a couple months later, I end up getting recognized for that. And that was just an instinctual response, and ended up getting Trooper of the Year for rendering life-saving. Nice. And I really didn't think through that. I just did.
Yeah. All in office attire.
In office attire, yes. After working a full day and commuting 3 hours prior to the full day.
Yeah. So you mentioned that it felt like an eternity. Do you know how much time actually lapsed between when you get out of the car and when you actually get back into your car?
You know, I don't. I think that was written on the write-up, but I don't actually have that committed to memory. It probably was only like 10 minutes, and it felt like eons. And really, one of the performance metrics that the Florida Highway Patrol has is a response time. So I knew that they were coming, and especially with a commercial motor vehicle rollover and the volume of traffic, the time of day, I knew they were coming. It just, when you're in that scene at the time, it feels like an eternity, but it probably was only a few minutes.
Yeah, and there was only 2 people involved in the crash?
It was a single vehicle. And so it was a rollover. I think there was a slight curvature in the roadway, and so he was going too quickly. And there was a passenger who got ejected. He was not wearing a seatbelt. The driver was wearing a seatbelt, but because of the force and the rollover of the vehicle, he could not get out. He ended up succumbing to his injuries, and he was also impaired. So that was not a good scene for anybody. But the good thing was there was no secondary crashes and nobody else got hurt. I'm bad that the driver did not end up making it, but
Yeah. But the one that was ejected survived?
survived. And that's the one that I was working on. Yes.
Wow. Wow. That is impressive because I mean, you know, not many analysts, as you mentioned, get themselves in that situation, and not many people even get a chance to perform CPR on somebody. But in this case, man, it seems like you handled just about every aspect of it between doing the CPR, talking to the driver, and even directing traffic.
It's definitely a different perspective to ride either right front seat or to have that trooper background or that law enforcement background and concurrently work as an analyst or the leader of the analyst group. Is definitely a different perspective. And I would on the weekend spend time riding right front seat, riding shotgun with the troopers through Jacksonville, stopping people with narcotics and registered gang folks. And really, I mean, it was definitely a different perspective. I don't necessarily that's not for everybody, right? That's definitely an individual decision.
So you mentioned that you had to stop 10 miles down the road or so
I
for
did.
the adrenaline dump. But even after that, was there a period in time that it really dawned on you what you just accomplished?
No, I know I remember having a couple of phone calls, probably to my mom and to my dad, explaining the situation, and I felt my teeth chattering as still part of the sort of anatomical response to such a scene. But no, by the time I got back to Jacksonville, I didn't, life goes on. So I had
Oh,
child responsibilities and work the next day. I didn't think
wow.
about it.
Oh, geez, that is impressive and quite a analyst badge story.